We're now going to go into the section where we go through a couple of scenarios. All right, scenario number 1, and this is a very common one in Ballarat at the moment. So, first home, new development. Amber and Jack are a couple building their first home in Lucas. They are financially very stretched. What is the best bang for buck in terms of energy savings? Let's go one question at a time. I've got a few questions here.
The best bang for buck. So it's if you're working in a project, if you're just buying something off the plan, you sort of lock yourself into whatever the builder is doing there, and often don't have all that much flexibility. I would start one step back from that. I've got no problem with the project home concept can work well. But what you'd want to do is think to yourself, I've actually got a slide here. Doesn't matter, I'll just talk. What you want to do is you want to check that the plan that you've got makes sense for the block that you're putting it on. So often with these plans, they should get an energy rating of the house on the block, but sometimes those energy ratings are just done, making some assumptions, and then they do a rating of the house in 4 different orientations, and then that's it, and you get whatever orientation is on the development itself. So I would just do this test. Get the plans of the house and look at the elevations of the home. When you look at the elevations, it should become clear to you which direction has more glass. And that direction that has more glass should be pointing north. Now, if it's not, if it's rotated around the other way, then it might not be the best design for that block. So that's one thing to think about. Now, if you just fallen in love with a house, if you've got the block you've got, and you just want to go for it, I would also just ask them if I can get the thermal performance assessment just to see what it was. That's sort of useful. And in fact, on that, it will tell the direction that it was rated under, so that would be a useful thing to know. Then probably what you're wanting to look at, your best bang for buck from that point, assuming you've got the design you've got the neighbours you've got the overshadowing you've got, it would be to check what insulation has been specified for the design. And my rule of thumb, this is pretty much what we use as far as insulation goes. We do R2.5 in the wall as standard and R4 in the ceiling. So I think those are reasonable. If on your specification it says R2, I think it's worthwhile asking the question, can I upgrade to 2.5? You can get to 2 in a standard 90mm cavity. You can go in the walls to R2.7. It will fit, but it's pretty expensive at the moment to go to R2.7. So it probably doesn't give you the bang for the buck. And then as far as homeowners go, you then want to look at your appliances. You want to see what hot water system, that's a big one, what the hot water system is going in. You're hoping that it's, if you can, do a heat pump hot water system. If you can't adjust it, you're sort of stuck with what it is. The heating and cooling, now if they just put in a gas system, ask if you can put in reverse cycle air conditioning, because probably what you're going to find is come the first hot summer, you will want to have air conditioning in one of those homes anyway. And so you're going to end up paying for it anyway. Why not put in reverse cycle air conditioning from the start? Depends whether you can afford it at the start. But if you can, I would do that. And then the appliances that you stock your house with. That is normally in the discretion of the person buying the home. So look out for stars and look out for good deals, I guess.
This reminds me of my cousin a couple of years ago at Christmas, brought the floor plan for the house that her and her partner were going to have built, I think, in Delacombe, all excited to show the family. It was their first home, and the first question we asked was, where's north on the plan? And they couldn't tell us. And they said, why does that matter? Does that matter? And they'd actually flipped the orientation of the house from from how it was presented to them, so that they could have a bigger driveway?
Yeah, now all of those houses should have been rated for all directions. Like, they're not allowed to do it without having some method behind why they can flip it.
Yeah.
But there will be a direction that house was originally designed for, probably in the designer's mind when they were doing
Yeah,
it.
and they flipped it 180.
Yeah.
So just shows the importance of knowing these kinds of things and the difference that it can make.
Yeah, and it can make quite a lot of difference. Single glazing, you're probably looking up to about a star of difference. Double glazing, more like half a star, because double glazing is a little bit more insulative. It doesn't lose as much heat if it's facing the wrong way.
The next question I have down is, can they get a loan extension for changes to make their home more sustainable?
I don't know.
That might not be a question.
all I can say from a regulatory point of view is NatHERS is currently working on something called InHome, NatHERS InHome. NatHERS InHome will be a software that an assessor goes out to existing homes and does an assessment on them, and then gives recommendations. Those recommendations are going to feed into or create the infrastructure for a green loans scheme. So I think that sort of thing is coming, as well as mandatory disclosure will create an infrastructure for the idea of having to disclose the energy rating at point of sale.
This fictional couple, Amber and Jack, they want a pavilion-style home, so one that has a couple of courtyards inset into the footprint rather than a rectangular home. What would you advise?
I would advise go for it, as long as you understand that whenever you introduce articulation, is not quite thermally as efficient as straight sides. Basically, there's a relationship between the volume of air that you encompass in a house and the surface area. The more surface area you have for a certain volume, the more relationship or the more surface you have to lose heat and gain heat. So if you're introducing articulations, you can still have the same floor area, but now you've got a lot more wall area. Now, if you put in 2.5 insulation, it gets around, it gives you a little bit more leeway. So I'm not standing here saying go for boring homes, not at all. Delight is, and aesthetics is a really big part of living in a house. But just understand that you might be sacrificing a little bit. But once again, go back to the energy rating, see what the energy rating is.
Amber is convinced that gas is best for hot water heating and cooking. How would you persuade them to go with a different option?
So I've never actually met anyone who's worried about gas for hot water. Most people don't, they just want hot water. Gas for cooking, yeah, I've had people who are they just love cooking or whatever it is, and they're used to using gas. I would just have that conversation, just let them know that from an environmental point of view, over time the electricity grid will green, whereas gas won't, like I said before. And then I'll leave it up to them. You saw the cooking wedge. The cooking wedge is only small. So it's not going to be a huge impact in the scheme of things. Having said that, I did a call out to the Energy Efficiency Homes page, something like that anyway, and got a range of people screaming about how fantastic their induction cooktops were, and so I've got quite a lot of quotes of people saying their induction cooktop's good. And I've never had clients yet who weren't happy with what got put in at the end of the day. So yeah, induction cooking, if you haven't used it, it's very responsive these days. Just like gas is responsive, it's responsive. It's very quick. It's quite nice in that if for instance, I'm used to cooking my sausages at a certain temperature, you can just dial it in on some models. So it's got some advantages.
So the last question that I have on this topic, and I hope you're all thinking about whether you have questions about this scenario, is there's quite a bit of marketing around steel frames. How do they measure up?
So steel frames, again, a good technology as long as you understand the limitations as well. Steel frames are much more conductive. Steel is about 1,000 times more conductive per surface area compared to softwood, 500 times compared to hardwood. So if you have a situation where you frame the house and you put your plaster on, so your frame's running along here, you put your plaster, internal plaster on one side and you direct fix cladding onto the other side, this has a lot of issues for condensation, but assuming you do that, even if you put insulation bats in between, you're going to get a lot of what they call thermal bridging, and the heat is just going to flow through the stud-work. And NatHERS have actually realised this, and the new version of the code requires thermal bridging be put in, and that if you get an assessor to do the assessment, the assessor has to check that, or check the box that it's using steel framing, and it downgrades the rating to work with that. Yeah. So the idea under the code at the moment is that steel framing, you need to adjust steel framing till it's at the same performance level as timber framing. Timber's a bit more, it's got a higher R value, higher resistance to heat flow. So, yeah.
Does anyone have any questions about this scenario, Amber and Jack, building in Lucas?
Do you think that there's a role in having independent assessments being done throughout this sort of build process, where there is like an estate sort of situation to ensure that there's good compliance throughout the building process? Because there's a lot of plans and things being put onto paper and making sure that they're meeting certain requirements. But if you're just a client, like these two, unaware of making sure that things are being done correctly, do you think that there's a role there for independent assessments?
So I don't want to give the wrong impression. I think that all of those houses that have gone on there, if they, so assuming they followed the rules, have had, in a sense, independent assessments, in that the house that you see would have been, even if it wasn't rated for that particular block, it would have had a rating on it in that direction. So each plan would have had 4 different ratings or whatever, and the one that you get on the block has been rated and does comply with the 6 stars there. Now, there might be a little bit of difference when you actually put it on the block compared to whatever the neighbour builds. There might be a little bit more overshadowing, and whether that was taken into account. I'm not actually 100% over what goes on in these big developments, because sometimes they get special allowances to pull it all off. On your average single block, each one of those is done looking at what is next to you and what is around you, so it can get the overshadowing and the effects of that right and make sure that your home is still performing at a reasonable level. So is it a good idea? Yes, I think it's important if it's not being done, and I'm not 100% sure whether that's a loophole at the moment, but it really should comply, and that would be the idea under the law. But again, I'm not sure for Lucas in particular, or some of these bigger developments, whether they make special arrangements often with council as to what's required.
We're in a heating climate in Victoria. The heat pumps registers up high are probably not ideal for getting heating into a home. Are there registers that you can get that sit down low on the wall?
Yeah, there are floor registers as well. I mean, all that I showed you was that picture. But yes, there's ones that just look like grills that you can build into bulkheads. There are ones that look like grills that can go into the floor. There are cassettes that go into the roof. As far as you are right that when you're putting in heat, it doesn't make sense to put heat at ceiling level, but the fans will typically blow it downwards for heat, and so it's not. I haven't found it an issue. To tell you the truth, I don't think that there's much. When the system's on, there's a fair amount of mixing that goes on. The other thing that's something just piggyback on that. Sometimes when you do an efficient house, you don't need if you add up all the loads of all the rooms, it might only be 1 or 2 systems that you need for the whole house, but you've got a distribution issue. And if it's just a centrally located on a wall or something, And often if you do put in ceiling fans, if you want to go a little bit cheaper, you can put in ceiling fans, and just having some moving air in the house tends to even things and shift it along a little bit. But the answer is yes, there is floor registers if you want to go that way.
You mentioned the ratio of volume to surface area of a house affecting its efficiency. Does that mean that a two-storey house is more efficient than a single storey, or is the concern about heat flowing up the stairs a problem?
Yeah, so single storey rates better, at least in the climates that I've assessed. Mainly because of the single stories tend to connect to the ground a lot better. Even if you do a timber subfloor, it still gets a bit of the mass of the earth, like the stability of just being close to the earth. Whereas the problem with going double story, yes, you get stratification, you get heat rising, and you typically have a lightweight structure with lots of surface area but no heaviness to it, and so the heat can build up quite quickly in the upper floor. So of the two, if you have the benefit of space, I tend to like personally single story. I think it's much better as we age. We don't have to go upstairs. You get longer lines of sight for the same volume of house. You typically have longer sight lines, whereas double story, by the very nature of sitting one on top of the other, your eyes hit a wall a lot quicker. So for those reasons, I tend to like single stories. But once again, the thermal performance assessment process allows the assessor and the designer who gets involved with the assessor as a consultant, allows them to look at the performance in the different rooms. And we've done, we used to have a 9-star series, and we had some double stories in our 9-star series. The 9-star series, we put in a lot of reverse brick veneer, and we had walls over walls so that we could start those brick at ground level and take them to the upper floor on the inside to give a bit of mass and heavyweight elements to the upper floor. And we didn't need that brick on the ground floor. That had plenty of mass to it, but it helped for the upper floor, and it's just the easiest way to start it from the bottom and go up if you want it up. So there are things that you can do, and the thermal performance assessment process does give you an indication to try different things, and then you can cost it and see whether it is going to work in your situation.
Next question.
I was just going to ask on that thermal performance checklist, and based on that current NCC, like you said about a lot of the builders making sure they tick it all off, but those that checklist can help us with the new NCC building 7-star annotations for our drawings, correct? Yeah, really.
Yeah, the Builder's Thermal Performance Checklist, yes. Now, if you're working with a project home, whether or not you'll get them interested in taking it on, I don't know. But if you're working in the custom home market, you probably can, and then it becomes you can get it to become part of the building contract. And if you're working with a progressive builder, they'll probably be quite interested in it. And when they read through the items on that checklist, and it will be on that Net Zero site when it comes out. You will, if you go through Design Matters as well, you can get it there, and where else? And Builders Declare, we're also going to have it on our new website. So it's something that I'm hoping the industry will adopt, and will just become part of what they do. And I'm doing it not so much from consumers, though obviously it helps consumers, but it helps builders maintain a consistency, which is often hard to do if you've got a number of jobs on the go, and you're leaving it to the guys on the ground to get it done because you're popping in and out. And that's why quality assurance checklists work well. So hopefully it'll be taken up.
Just a question about insulation. What difference between a home that was built 10 years ago and to current 7-star standard?
So there's 10 years ago, probably not much. Back in 2004, pre-2004, that's when the star rating system came in. So before that, there was some numbers in the code. I think it was R1.5, I think, was supposed to be in the walls. R2.5 was supposed to be in the ceilings. But once the energy rating came in, then you saw numbers start to go up. But we're limited with insulation on how much you can put in standard construction before you need to start making segments of the house, or wall segments in particular, wider. You've got a lot of space in the roof often to go bigger, fatter insulation, but subfloor and walls, you're sometimes constrained by space. And it's sort of, you sort of get a bang for buck going up to R2.5 in the walls. So maybe 10 years ago, maybe they're still at R2, but they're definitely putting in insulation 10 years ago. R2.5, they've sort of stopped there. We tend to try to go to R2.7 because you can get some heavy density bats that can do it, but it's basically twice as expensive as the R2.5, so you don't really get a bang for buck payment. And with insulation, it's a funny thing. You get diminishing returns. You get a lot of return for the first R1 that you put in, resistance value of 1. Once you double that to put on an R2, you don't get double the benefit. You get like half the benefit of the first R1 you put on. If you go to R3, you get like half the benefit of half the benefit, that you put on. So it diminishes the more that you do it. So it becomes, more insulation is better, but it just becomes a cost-effective, where do we stop? Yeah.
We've just got enough time to maybe go through one more scenario. Bob is a developer looking to build some rental properties. What environmental considerations should he take into account? What is he required to do? And what's in it for him with regards to sustainable building?
Yeah, well, this is where you get what they call split incentives. Bob is potentially just wanting to get the most return that he can and to do something as cheaply as possible, and potentially just let the renter pay whatever they have to pay in energy use. And that is why we have to have regulation. We have to have regulation to fix what... this is a market failure. A split incentive is a market failure. So that's why you have regulation. And what does Bob have to do? Well, at the moment, Bob has to make a 7-star home. Well, actually, from October, Bob has to make a 7-star home. And there've always been people who go ahead, and you read your Sanctuary magazine or whatever, and you can see these fantastic things. And these people need to be out there for proof of concept and to prove things. But the dollar conscious part of the market will stay there until you put in some regulation. So now, if Bob wanted to do more, he would then have to... Well, here's the thing. Now that we have NatHERS Whole of Home, unlike previous star ratings, you could have a 6-star home, a small 6-star home, and a big 6-star home. They're both 6 stars, right? They both use the same number of megajoules to heat per square metre, but of course the big one is bigger, and so it's going to use a lot more to run. Now that we've gone to whole of home and we're looking at the appliance efficiency as well as the stars per square metre and the other appliances, hot water, all those things, you now get running cost of the house. And so this can actually potentially be useful for Bob if he wants to be a little bit more altruistic and wants to increase the performance or choose heat pumps and whatever. He can get a running cost. I did one for a client the other day because they were wanting to know, should I go an instantaneous electric system because it's nice and small and they're pretty space deprived, or should I go and just take up the whole laneway, my access to my backyard, and put in a heat pump? And so I did the simulation both ways. It was a $400 running difference a year. Now, Bob could use that sort of information, say this is what the running cost of this rental is, and he might be able to up his dollars by, $10 a week because you're going to save $400 a year, something like that.
Great, thank you so much.